By the way. Yeah.
Here we are. I'm introducing you now. Aw.
She's like trying to play with me, and I'm like, not now, not now.
What a sweetie.
So, all right,
Hey. Dan
all right.
Henk defines the term warrior. You could say that his chosen genre of dark sci fi horror defines his life. If dark science fiction looks unflinchingly at things that make us uncomfortable without a sugarcoat, then that would amply describe the plot twists that this artist and writer has lived. Like an HBO drama series, Hank has seen his fair share of villains. Experiencing homelessness and societal rejection is one thing. Surviving a violent crash only to have a thumb tendon severed by a gun wielding crackhead is another. But that isn't all. Diagnosed with brain cancer in 2001, surviving surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation, Hank married 3 months later, only to lose her when she was killed in a motorcycle accident by a hit and run driver. Still, no matter what dark energy life tries to throw at him, Hank survives and puts a large stamp on life. He is a well known tattoo artist, painter, and the author of several books. He hosts the podcast series Skull Session, which interviews authors and artists about their methodology and project. Hank's art is extraordinary. His gift has decorated the covers of several metal bands, the pages of independent magazines, and book covers. His books are like putting his artwork into words. With rave reviews on Amazon, his stories are every bit as compelling as his art. Please welcome my guest, Dan Henk.
Wow, that made me sound great. You hyped me up a little bit there.
Right on. So you mentioned you were raised in a military family, and that usually means you moved around a lot.
Yes,
How
it is.
hard is it on a kid in school for making friends?
It's pretty hard because every it was 3 year intervals, so it's like during those 3 years, especially when you're a kid, like years take forever. It's like you're like, oh my god, it's been like an hour. It's so long. Now it just seems like you just fly by. But back then, I remember you'd build up these relationships and families, and it seemed like you spent an eternity doing all of it, and then we move. It's start all over again. Plus, kids can be cruel, so you're like the new kid on the block, and they've all known each other since they were born, and you're coming into the mix, and it's not like there's anything really like different or breaking the mold for you. It's just you don't fit in with the people they've known all their lives, so it can be hard.
How did you, or, well, your parents were religious and you didn't have a TV until you were in grade 5. I also imagine metal music and the horror movies were not welcome in your house either. So, how did you escape?
Well, because we moved every 3 years, and my parents, they were the exact opposite of helicopter parents. They're pretty much like, okay, dinner's at 6. If you want dinner, show up. And then we just like jump into BMX bikes and like go out. We like build free forts. We like go all around town. It's like you kind of lived on your own. You did your own thing. So it's when I got into stuff, it really had nothing to do with my parents. Like we weren't really close. It's like I know my dad loves sci-fi and he loves war movies. So like I saw Apocalypse Now in the theaters as a little kid, you know, and so we see all that, and I just like I remember he saw Alien in the theaters, and my mom talked him out of taking us, but we watched it on TV. We had to see it, but so I don't know. I just leaned towards that stuff, and like we lived on these like isolated military bases. So it's like, aside from like, running around building tree forts and biking and stuff, there was no internet in those days. We didn't have a TV. So I go to the local library and I check out this huge stack of books. I have the whole thing read within a week. Then I go back and I read more. Like I was reading full adult novels by fourth grade. So it's just, I kind of lived in my own little world. So it's like when my parents started, they started not liking some of the stuff I got into. It was like, okay, I don't really care. Because it's not like we were like, attached like this. We were kind of like, I don't know. My dad had a very like, my dad's German, my German Norwegian, and he has a very like stiff, it's not really close, comfortable, personal type of person. So it's kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to do this now. It's like, yeah, we didn't have that connection where I felt really bad or I felt I should express myself or whatever.
And how did you imagine your future when you were a kid? Did you think that you would become an artist?
Well, I thought I was going to be a comic artist. And like I took oil painting classes in the third grade, and my dad drew. He was pretty good, and but he's military, and like he always thought that like drawing is a cool hobby, but it's nothing serious. So then as I get along, like I couldn't decide if I wanted to be a writer or an artist. And then I read some of the more advanced comic books like Watchmen and Dark Knight and stuff, and I was like, oh, I can do both. I can write it and draw it. And my parents were, I mean, they didn't really say anything about that because they're like, oh, well, if you're reading, that's good. But they're like, that's not really a career. And like, I'd sit at home at a drawing table and, like I was working on my own comics when I was like, 12 years old. And I was like going to indie comic shops and like showing them to the people there, getting critiques and stuff, but once I, got 17, turned 17, and I was like, well, I need a scholarship or I need like a co-signer for my loan. Like, I didn't even think I could get a scholarship. I thought, that was like far off, but maybe I could get someone to co-sign for a loan. My parents were like, art's not a career. So that's when the real problem arose.
And your artwork is described as visceral, which reaches out and grabs people. And that actually perfectly describes that punk rock subculture and metal. And what was it about that music that made you feel seen?
I just felt like well, the first I got into metal, I got into like more like poppy heavy metal, like Rad and Quiet Riot, when I was like 12. And then I heard for the first time I heard three albums. I heard Metallica, Ride the Lightning. I heard Slayer, Hell Awaits, and I heard Megadeth, Peace Sells. And then that like turned my whole perception. So then I really got into that stuff, and then a little bit later on, and at first I liked it because it was like, if you notice that it's like metal, but it's like kind of bordering punk rock a little bit. It's like a little bit like we're gonna do our own thing, we're our own tribe, we're our own personality, we're own whatever. And I thought one is very expressive, like Metallica is big into like Lovecraft and Cthulhu and like all sorts of storytelling. Like, I love stories, and like especially when it's like all like cosmic horror and all this stuff going on. I was like, wow, I mean, I'm getting that. Like Metallica, like the first couple albums they're basically all stories put to music, and I loved that. In fact, they were one of my favorite bands, and then I heard punk rock. And punk rock, I was getting right to the age when like that really, really spoke to me. The like, the authorities full of it, like nobody tells me what to do. And I really like to this day, I still like a lot of the principles of punk rock, the kind of indie stuff, not the kind of destroy everything anarchist stuff. But yeah, I remember that really spoke to me, and I really got into that. And that's when my parents, all of a sudden, like, it was too much. Like, I remember when I was in middle, like, the worst I did is, well, there were a couple of things. I ran away from home twice, and my parents came and got me from homeless shelters. And, I remember my dad chasing me around the house because my hair was too long. So he chased me around with scissors and trying to hold me down and cut my hair. And my mom was like screaming, "You're going to put his eyes out. You're going to put his eyes out." And then I got into punk rock, and I had like a blue mohawk, and like I looked like a British punk rocker, like a leather jacket with like
Oh, wow.
spikes on it. It was all painted up and everything. And my parents hated it. And I had a friend, a single mom, and she was really cool. And I ended up having to keep all my stuff in her house.
So when did you get your first tattoo?
Not till I was 21, but that's mainly because I had no money. Like I wanted to get tattooed before then, but I turned 18 and my parents kicked me out of the house and they moved. So like I lived in the woods, like homeless, like showers, McDonald's restrooms. Like I had a friend with a trailer and he gave me $2 and I bought a bag of rice and I stole salt and pepper from McDonald's, and so I cooked the rice in the microwave and I put salt and pepper on it, and that kept me alive for like 2 weeks.
So your hands are so important for what you do as a visual artist. And I just can't even imagine what you went through. But how on earth were you able to continue to work after that knife cut through your tendon?
Well, I was kind of lucky in that I'm right-handed, and that happened in my left hand. So it was like my left thumb, but it's like I can move it enough to hold stuff in place. Like this is the thumb that got cut, and I can like move it like I don't know if you see. I'm having to concentrate to like move it, whereas my real one I can move easily.
Right.
You know, and but I could like when I draw, it doesn't matter. When I tattoo, like you hold somebody or you spread the skin and you tattoo, and it's enough for that. But I remember when it happened, I was like, this is the worst thing that ever happened to me. Like I was looking for the guy for 2 weeks, but I mean, it was a crackhead, so you're not gonna find him.
No, no. And the Black Seas of Affinity, a reader has defined it like a mad, violent episode of the X-Files. How long did it take you to write this first book?
It probably took me longer than it should have, because what happened is I originally had this idea, and I had this idea when I was like 15. And first I made a comic book, then I made another. Like I kept upping the or redoing the pages and rewriting the story, and I did that for years and years, and finally I submitted it to like there was that indie comic boom. And like Caliber Press did The Crow, and like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out, and so all this stuff, was blossoming, and people were taking chances. And I remember I did some early pages that I sent out to. I mean, by this point I was in my early 20s, so I did these pages that sent out. I got picked up by Paradox Press, and they folded. I got picked up by Kitchen Sink Press, and they folded. Like everybody was folding in those days. So then I was like, well, I don't know what I need to do. Maybe I should go to art school. So I put myself through art school, community college, which is what I can afford. But school is what you make of it. So, I went there. I looked out at a really good teacher. He was like this controversial black artist in DC. So by him being this controversial artist, he, as long as I put effort into it, he thought it was great. And his name was Mr. Thomas. I never knew his first name, but so then he told me, he's like, if you want an art career, you have to move to New York City. So I moved to New York City, and I interviewed DC Comics, and that's right when they were like going down. Like basically the movie saved all the comic companies, because otherwise they'd all been bankrupt. but I interviewed with DC Comics, and like I did a bunch of portfolio days and stuff, and and one guy hooked me up with an interview with the guy who had the Vertigo line, which is like the Sandman, Swamp, like the adult line from DC Comics. So I thought, oh, this is great, this is perfect, and I interviewed with him, and he was like so negative. He like shows me it's like a Superman comic, as a splash page of Superman punching Lex Luthor. He's like, "You want to do this?" I was like, "No." He's like, "We don't have a job for you." That was the whole interview, and then they fired him 2 weeks later. So, but that same, sorry to make this so long, but that same story, I was like, well, I'll do an illustrated novel, because that way I could actually tell a longer, more complex story and do some like cool illustrations. So I did that, and originally I had in mind I'd do like 30 illustrations, but if you do a full page illustration, that's called a splash page, and those take me 3 days to do. So like originally I was going to do 30, and then I narrowed that down to 11. And then I wrote the novel, and I kind of like at the time I had like brain cancer. I had a bunch of stuff interrupting me, and so like my wife died and hit a run, and that was kind of like the impetus to like I got to get this out now. But like I had kind of like a rough draft. I sent out to a publisher. They're like, no. And I mean, they should have said that because it wasn't that good. But then I like really applied myself to it, and sent out to another publisher. And now it's actually on the third publisher. But that was kind of that's a long story of how it started.
And you do have a few books to your name. So which one are you the most proudest of? Is it the first one?
Well, the first one I finally got the rights back to after like 10 years from the original publisher. And I did a massive rewrite and re-edit and everything. So I'm pretty proud of that. But I like it just because it's a story I've had forever. And pretty much everything that I do is kind of like they're all kind of like in the same continuity. So they're all like loosely connected. But I describe it like a Mad Max Road Warrior. Like you don't have to watch Mad Max to see Road Warrior. So you don't have to read my first novel to read one of the future ones, but it does give you a little bit more backstory. But I really like that. My last one, my latest one is an anthology, which is like 16 stories. Well, it's 16 stories by 14 authors. Like two of the authors did 2 stories, and I have 2 stories in that, and I like that. It's called The Never Dead. But the last in that like full novel series I did was called The End of the World. And when the lockdowns hit, it actually jumped up in sales. Everyone was like, "Oh, it's the end of the world."
Good timing.
Yeah.
Now, going back several decades, tattoos were considered taboo. And I remember how it used to be when people wore tattoos and oh my God, that person's never going to get a job. And actually, it really was difficult to get a job if you had a tattoo. And I think that was even one of the questions sometimes in some of the interviews. But now it's the norm. So can you figure out, do you know when and what do you think brought this into the mainstream? Like, it just seems like it's happened. I can't really pinpoint when this transition happened, but now, you're almost the outcast if you don't have a tattoo.
Well, they say under the age of 36, 80% of the population is tattooed. And I think it was kind of a combination of factors. When it started, it was not the norm. And like I remember, like one of my jobs before I started tattooing was a bike messenger, and I got my first tattoo. And like when it's hot, you roll up your sleeves so you can see the tattoo. I remember making a delivery, and some lady was like, "Oh, you have a tattoo? Why would you get tattooed?" Not that I really care what she said, but still, it's like I think what happened is like we had like the pandemic, we had the George Floyd riots, we had like there's a lot of craziness that happened. People kind of learned to be more accepting. Like, they legalized gay marriage. Like people just like it seems to me that people used to be like way more conservative. And so you have like people are really polarized. You have like I remember like the PMRC, and then people talking about cop killer, and like now nobody really cares. So whatever you do, as long as you're not hurting other people to express yourself, that's cool with most of society. And I think that people kind of learned that like tattoos don't necessarily make you a bad person. Like you could be a great person with tattoos or a bad person with tattoos. Just like having a haircut doesn't make you a bad person. The clothes don't make you a bad person. So I think that was like an old idea, of like a conservative, super like right wing idea that just kind of died out.
And there's a lot of people who I know who can't stop at one. There's something about it. It's like addictive. They maybe they like the pain of going through it. I don't know, but
Well,
they
we
they
joke
they have to have more than one after they've had the first one.
we joke that we put heroin in the ink so that you keep coming back to us, but it's like no, because it's like this is how I describe it. Like if you get a new car, what is probably the first thing you do? You probably do something like fairly cheap, like tint the windows or whatever. But eventually, you want new rims. You want because like once you start customizing it, you're like, oh, I should do this. Oh, I should do that. I think it's the same thing with tattoos. Like you're like, this is me. Like this is my body. I want to, customize it. I want to do something cool with it. And it's way more than like even when like people when they wear clothing, they're like, I'll get cool boots. They're like, oh well, I should get some cool pants with that. Oh, I should get a cool jacket with that. So I think that's why like people start seeing the possibility.
Yeah, and you become the canvas instead
Yeah.
of your wall. Because people move around a lot, but they can't change their body too often.
Well, you should definitely do your research. I mean, there's a lot of people that they want to get tattooed, and then there definitely do's and don'ts. Like you definitely don't want to price shop. Like if you don't like somebody's prices, go to somebody else. You don't have to argue with them, but once you start like trying to bargain with them, I mean, it's not
Yeah.
like a Walmart or car
You
dealer or
get what you
whatever.
pay for, right?
Yeah, you get what you pay for, and you don't want to piss off the guy that's about to do your art.
And this, uh, is there an age, like obviously as you get older, your skin gets thinner. It's life. I imagine it's a lot more painful when you get older. I'm saying this for me.
Well, everybody says that tattoos get more painful as you get older, but it's not really that. I mean, if you notice, like when you're in your 20s, if you bruise yourself or whatever, it's like no big deal. But if you're like in your 50s and you bruise yourself, you're like, "Ow, that really hurt." It's just kind of like that. You kind of like it seems like you're more sensitive to everything, but it's not really that you're. I mean, people who have different skin types often have different skin types for a variety of factors. Like I tattooed a guy this weekend that I was not happy with at all because he had like that. We call that crocodile skin. It's like you're tattooing, and it's like the ink's just not going in. You're working so hard. He has that tough like sunburnt leathery skin. You know, but that's not a factor of age. That's a factor of like your circumstances and what you've been exposed to. Like one of the worst is like when you tattoo the arms of people that are bikers, and they've been out in the sun and they're burning that skin away. Like the best are like when you get people that are like, I wouldn't say they're shut-ins, but they're kind of like I don't know, maybe they have a tech job or whatever, but they're not exposed to a lot of sun. That's probably it. Like the
Yeah.
sun makes the skin leathery, and the problem is the harder your skin is to tattoo, the more you have to turn the power up, so the more it hurts.
Huh. So I have to ask, because I mean, you've been through a lot, guy. I mean, seriously. So, has your talent helped you survive?
Well, I think, I mean, probably I can't really talk about it because it's like if you have a talent, it's like I feel like it's more what other people see, like you're egotistical. If you go, I'm real good at this or I'm real good at that, but I think it helps to like have an agenda and a goal in life. It's like this is what I want to do with my life, and like all the things that come up, and so I look at them as like roadblocks. You know, I'm like I want to do this, and I'm like it's got in the way. That got in the way. You know, but then I just keep going. I'm like I'm not going to let this be the end of me.
And how, I mean, obviously, from a writer perspective, and, I've heard this from musicians as well, is whatever pain comes your way, you just put it into your art.
Well, I mean, I think it's not as direct. Like some people think it's like super direct, like oh, pain. Okay, this is the way you handle it. It's more
Yeah.
like it influences you.
But the
Yeah,
emotional side of it, you put right into the art so that
right.
it speaks back to you. Yeah.
Like probably if I did like if I tried to psychoanalyze myself and did a retrospective of everything, I'd say, well, a lot of the dark influences or a lot of the dark circumstances I've been through in life have influenced my perspective. So the way I write and like the kind of art I do, although I have like dark stuff forever, so I don't know what that says. Like I remember I was like 12 or 13, and my favorite movie was Evil Dead 2. So I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre when I was like, 14. So I mean, it probably did help, but it kind of helps. Like I don't know, you see a lot of the darkness that a lot of life has, so you kind of want to incorporate that. But I've also seen like how positive a lot of people can be. So you see more of the dichotomy of everything, and I think that helps bring it up. That like I think like as a side note, I think I'm a way better writer now than I was when I was like 20 because I've seen everything from all different perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've created a lot of artwork for bands. And which ones were the best to work with? And if you could choose a band to create an album cover for, who would that be that you haven't
Well,
worked with?
oh, that I haven't worked with. I don't know. I mean, probably. So like I've created a lot of album covers for like metalcore bands and hardcore bands and punk bands and indie bands, you know, and I find like I don't know if I'd say it's like one particular band, because every time I'm like, oh yeah, man, I really love this band. I'd love to do artwork for them, and then as you delve further into it, you kind of see the personalities involved. I don't hate any of the guys, just some of the guys are like way more serious and oriented towards, making sure all the ends are tight, like Coalesce. And I'm covering for Coalesce, and Sean Ingham from Coalesce was amazing from day one to the end. He was like, I want this. I talked to him. He was like, yeah, that sounds good. And then he paid me. He was like, everything he said he would do, he did. And there was like another band that was one of my favorites. And I remember, I do all these sketches and watercolor sketches. And I finally did oil painting. And then they started questioning that. And in the end, after doing like over 100 hours of work for them, I didn't get paid a cent. So it's like I it's hard to say because you can say, oh, I like the sound of this band, but it's really the personalities that you deal with that would tell me whether or not it was a good experience or not.
And what is the tattoo that describes you and where you are at now?
The tattoo describes me the most. I don't know. It's like I don't necessarily subscribe to that like notion that like every tattoo you have has to have some deep personal meaning that speaks to you. It's like, yeah, they should have meaning, but it's like I remember I hate Ingmaster, by the way. Ingmaster has helped ruin the industry, you know. But because Ingmaster has like all these wrong notions that's put in people's heads that really are not true. You know, that's not the way the industry works. But like one thing is like they put in this notion that every tattoo you have has to have some deep personal meaning. Well, the deep personal meaning could be I like it. It doesn't have to be like I remember this one where it's like the guy's daughter beat cancer, so he has like a tattoo of her like punching a ball of cancer, and it's like you don't need anything that direct. I get a lot of like horror pieces, like cosmic horror, and that's kind of what I like, and I kind of like to have stuff like that on me. I have like a haunted house tattooed on me, and H.P. Lovecraft and Cthulhu and stuff like that. It's like it's not like I met Cthulhu, It's just I like that stuff, and I think that stuff looks good as tattoos. If it's done by a good artist and I like his style, I go to him. So it's like,
And like music and books, tattoos are personal, right?
yeah, yeah. And like it's not like it has to relate to you on the level of like something like super direct, like this happened in my life. It just relates to you because like, oh, that's cool, I like it.
Yeah, a lot of people like to kind of have their a tapestry of their chapters of their life on their arm too, or on
Right.
their
And I actually think that that's the worst because it feels forced. It's like I need this scenario because this scenario means. And I remember like when Inkmaster first came out, and people would come to the tattoo shop and they pick out the cheesiest piece. It'd be like a cross off of like an image on the wall, and they'd be like, "Well, let me explain what this means to me." I'm like, I really don't care. If they want like I remember one guy I did a portrait of his dead dog. I was like, I understand that. So I did the portrait of his dog and he really appreciated it and it said it looked like his dog. I was like, okay, that makes sense. Like I have a portrait of my dog tattooed on me, but it's like, that like trying to like meld everything into some life story. No.
yeah, yeah. Well, Dan, it was so wonderful to have you on my show. It's you just all those experiences that you have and the positivity that you share. I mean, it's just very inspiring. So I have to
Oh,
thank
thank
you.
you. Yeah, thank you. And thanks for